Hello, bookworms. Welcome to the Bonified Bookworm. And if you're here, you are here to read along with me and hopefully learn English. So, just wanted to provide a quick update. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to make the video a little bit longer and see if that's better. I think that would be easier on me since I cannot seem to get it together to do Tuesdays and Thursdays. So maybe if I make longer videos, we'll actually get through the book. And two, I think that's a little bit more, that's a little better for the audience because then you're able to kind of keep up with what's going on in the book instead of just getting little bits and pieces. So no book review today. We're just gonna jump into our book that we're reading. And when we left off, Joe and Simon are trying to get down the mountain. They've figured out a way to lower Joe down to each, they're lowering him down, I think, basically to as far as the rope can extend. And then they're also running into the problem of both of them are beginning to experience frostbite on their fingers. So that's no bueno. So again, we are reading Touching the Void by Joe Simpson, and we're going to pick up on page 89. So here we go. The storm had steadily increased until the spindrift flowed continually down the slope and threatened to push me off when I dug the seats. The wind gusted across the face, blasting the snow into exposed skin and forcing itself through the tiniest of openings in clothing. I was close to exhaustion. As the drops continued, I lapsed into resigned tolerance. The object of the lowering had long since escaped me. I couldn't think any further ahead than simply enduring the present. Simon said nothing at the changeovers, his expression fixed and rigid. We had locked ourselves into a grim struggle. My part was pain-racked, Simon's an endless physical battle to get me down almost 3,000 feet without a break. I wondered how often it occurred to him that the seats might collapse at any moment. I was beyond caring about such things, but Simon knew all the time that he could descend alone quite safely if he chose. I began to thank him for what he was doing and then quickly stopped myself. It would only emphasize my dependence on him. I dug the fifth belay seat while Simon climbed down to me. I didn't get far. After clearing the surface snow away, I struck water, ice. I was standing on my left foot, but it wasn't kicked deeply in. I perched on the front points of my crampons, a worrying position because I could feel my calf muscles tiring from the strain, and the idea that I might slip preyed on my mind. It would rip us both off the mountain. To make matters worse, the effort of staying quite still made me feel nauseous and dizzy. I kept shaking my head and pressing it against the snow, terrified that I might faint. It seemed such a stupid way to die after we had been through so much. It was a measure of how cold I had become to see how long it took before I thought of hammering an ice screw into the slope. The wind and constant avalanches had fogged my mind after numbing my body. Even when the idea did occur to me, it took some time to break through the lethargic apathy that engulfed me, and turning it into action seemed an achievement in itself. I was alarmed at my behavior. I had heard of people succumbing to cold without realizing it, reacting lazily and without thinking. When I had tied into the ice screw, I leant back on it and began a vigorous warming and waking exercise. I moved as much of my body as I could, flapped my arms, rubbed myself briskly, and shook my head. I warmed gradually, and I felt the sluggishness clear away. Simon noticed the ice screw. It was in the only ice we had so far found on the face, and he looked at me questioningly. There must be something below us, a steep section, something like that, I said. Yeah, I can't see a thing down there. He was leaning out from the screw, peering intently below him. It does get steeper, but I can't see what's causing it. I looked down and saw only the swirling clouds of spindrift whipping down. The sky was full of snow. It was either falling or being blown by the wind. The end result was the same, whiteout conditions. It wouldn't be a good idea to lower me if you don't know what's below, I said. It could be anything, a rock buttress, ice fall, anything. I know, but I can't. I know, but I can't remember seeing anything very large when we were on the Sierra Norte. Can you? No. A few rock outcrops maybe, but nothing else. Why don't you abseil down and give me some tugs if it's okay to follow? I reckon I can abseil myself. We haven't any choice. Right, I'll put another screw in. He hammered the screw into the hard water ice and clipped the doubled rope through it. I untied from the rope, staying safely clipped into my own ice screw. When Simon reached the end of the rope, he would organize a belay and then signal me to follow. I shouted to him when he had abseiled below me. Keep a knot in the end of the ropes. If I faint, I don't want to go off the end. He waved acknowledgement and slid down into clouds of spindrift. He was soon lost from sight, and I was alone. I tried not to think of anything happening to him. I stood quietly on one foot, gazing into the snow swirling madly round me. There was only the sound of hissing as it sprayed off my jacket and occasional tugs from the wind. It was a wild place in which to be alone. I thought of the sun on Urapaha through the window in the snow cave. That was this morning. God, it seemed so very long ago. Only this morning? And we had come down the ridge and over those crevices and then the ice cliff? A lifetime away. So much had changed. The cold crept through me again, and I could feel its heavy slowness spreading. I started my warming routine again, flapping, rubbing, driving the intruder away. Then I saw the ropes jerk spasmodically. I grabbed hold of them and felt the tugs come up the ropes again. I fixed my belay plate onto the ropes and removed the ice screw from which I had been hanging. I let my weight come down carefully onto the abseil ropes, watching the ice screw for any warning signs of failure. The ropes eased through the plate, and I slid down after Simon. After 20 feet, the slope dropped vertically under me. I stopped moving and glanced down. I could see the angle ease about 15 feet below. Beyond, there was only spindrift. As I abseiled past the wall, I could see that it consisted of patches of ice plastered onto a steep rock face. It went slowly past me in short, stepped walls and the steep ice cascades in between. Once or twice I bumped painfully against the rock, but for the most part I found abseiling to be easier and a lot less traumatic than being lowered. I could control the speed of descent, which helped. The steep walls were entirely pain-free because I could twist away and let my injured leg hang free in space, and even on the cascades I managed to keep from snagging it. I was concentrating on abseiling carefully, and I had become quite engrossed in what I was doing when Simon's voice broke into my thoughts. I looked down and saw him leaning back on an ice screw, grinning at me. There's one more steep bit. I saw the snow slope running below it, so it can't be far. As he spoke, he reached out and caught hold of my waist, tugging me gently towards him. He was careful, almost tender, in the way he spun me around so that I was facing out from the slope when I came to a stop beside him. He clipped me into a second ice screw that he had placed beside the one on which he was hanging, and directed my uninjured leg to a foothold that he had hacked from the ice. I realized then that he had been fully aware of the pain he had been putting me through, and this concern was a quiet way of saying, it's all right. I wasn't being a bastard. It just had to be done. Not far now, maybe another 4 lowers after this next abseil. I knew he was guessing. He was trying to cheer me up, and I felt deeply grateful. For a short moment on the storm-swept belay, we had accepted a warm sense of friendship. It felt like some cliche from a third-rate war movie. We're all in this together, lads, and we're all gonna make it home. It almost felt true and real, something unassailable in all the uncertainty. I put my arm on his shoulder and smiled at him. Behind his grin, I could see the truth of our situation. It had taken a lot out of him, and he looked drawn. His face, pinched with cold, showed all the tension he had been through, and his eyes didn't smile. There was concern and anxiety there, and I could see that despite his confident words, a dark uncertainty reflected the real story. I'm all right, I said. The pain's not so bad. How are your hands? bad and getting worse. He grinned at me, and I felt a stab of guilt. It was costing him. I had already paid. I upsell down and set up the belay. He stepped away from the slope and hopped smoothly into the vortex of spindrift below. I quickly joined him at the large bucket seat he had excavated. We were back to lowering from non-existent belays. I checked my watch. I couldn't see the face and was surprised to notice how dark it had become. When I flicked the little watch light on, I saw that it was 7:30. It had been dark for over an hour and I hadn't noticed. It made me realize how little I had to do. Digging belay seats and closing my mind to the lowering hadn't needed any light. The warmth of feeling on the abseil belay stayed with me though the next drop, and I had to resist the urge to giggle excitedly as the descent continued. I felt childishly irrational. The thought of reaching the glacier and a snug snow cave had become irresistible. It flooded through my mind like the images of a hot meal in front of the fire after a long day on the hills. I tried to push it away, fearful that to think that this way would be to invite disaster. I want never gets, I told myself, but it didn't work. I want never gets, I told myself. I don't quite understand that sentence. The lowering went quicker and easier. The pain stayed with me, but it was secondary. Getting down was all I could think about. The system of lowering became second nature, as if we had been practicing it for years, and as we slid down unseen through the storm, the sense of optimism snowballed with every foot descended. Simon's grin widened at every meeting, and his eyes bright in the light from my head torch said it all. We had regained control of the situation, and it no longer felt as if we were fleeing in disarray or fighting desperately against the odds. We knew we were making a controlled and orderly descent. I hunched my shoulders against an unusually heavy rush of spindrift and braced myself until it spent itself. Moving again, the buildup of snow between my chest and the slope flowed down over my legs, and I brushed the powder from the belay seat I had dug. The weather showed no sign of improving, but at least it was not getting worse. Simon appeared from the murk above me. His light flashed yellow off the clouds of snow. I kept looking at him so that my head torch would guide him down. He reached me as another avalanche swept over us. We both ducked. Bloody hell, that one before nearly knocked me off. They've been getting bigger, probably because we're near the bottom. There's more snow to build up on the way down. I was thinking of unroping. Then I won't take you down if I get hit hard. I laughed. If he fell past me, leaving me the rope, I would be able to do nothing with it. I'd fall anyway, so you might as well stay roped. That way I won't have to think about it, and I can blame you. He didn't laugh. He had almost forgotten that I was hurt, and now I had reminded him. He settled himself into the seat and arranged the ropes for the next lowering. 2 lowers to go at the most, I reckon. This will be the 8th, plus the 2 abseils, so we've covered 2,700 feet, or thereabouts. It can't be more than 3,000, so this might even be the last one. I nodded in agreement, and he grinned confidently at me as I slid down the slope and he faded into the snowstorm. Earlier, I had noticed that the angle of the slope was gradually easing. I took this as an encouraging sign, which indicated how close we were getting to the glacier. However, soon after I lost sight of Simon, I noticed the slope steepening again. I slid faster and snagged my foot more frequently. I was distracted by the pain and discomfort and thought no more of the slope. I struggled vainly to clear my foot from the snow before giving up and accepting the torment. The sense of weight on my harness increased, as did the speed. I tried braking with my arms, but to no effect. I twisted round and looked up into the darkness. Rushes of snow flickered in my torch beam. I yelled for Simon to slow down. The speed increased and my heart jumped wildly. Had he lost control? I tried braking again. Nothing. I stifled the rising panic and tried to think clearly. No, he hadn't lost control. I'm going in fast, but it's steady. He's trying to be quick. That's all. I knew it to be true, but there was still something wrong. It was the slope. Of course, I should have thought of it earlier. It was now much steeper, and that could mean only one thing. I was approaching another drop. I screamed out a frantic warning that he couldn't hear me, but he couldn't hear me. I shouted again as loud as I could, but the words were whipped away into the snow clouds. He wouldn't have heard me 15 feet away. I tried to guess how far I was from the halfway knot. 100 feet? 50? I had no idea. Each lowering became timeless. I slid forever through the boiling snow without any sense of time passing. Just a barely endurable period of agony. A sense of great danger washed over me. I had to stop. I realized that Simon would hear nothing, so I must stop myself. If he felt my weight come off the rope, he would know there must be a good reason. I grabbed my ice axe and tried to break my descent. I went heavily over the axe head, burying it into the slope, but it wouldn't bite. The snow was too loose. I dug my left boot into the slope, but it too just scraped through the snow. Then abruptly my feet were in space. I had time to cry out and claw hopelessly at the snow before my whole body swung off an edge. I jerked onto the rope and toppled over backwards, spinning in circles from my harness. The rope ran up to a lip of ice, and I saw that I was still descending. The sight vanished as a heavy avalanche of powder poured over me. When it ceased, I realized that I had stopped moving. Simon had managed to hold the impact of my body suddenly coming onto the rope. I was confused. I didn't understand what had happened, except that I was hanging free in space. I grabbed the rope and pulled myself up into a sitting position. The spinning continued, but it was slowing down. I could see an ice wall 6 feet away from me every time I completed a spin. When I stopped spinning, I was facing away from the wall and had to twist round to look at it. The spindrift had stopped. I shone my torch up the wall, following the line of the rope until I could make out the edge I had gone over. It was about 15 feet above me. The wall was solid ice and steeply overhanging. The rope jerked down a few inches, then stopped. Another avalanche of powder poured over the edge, and the wind blew it in eddies around me. I hunched protectively. Looking between my legs, I could see the wall dropping below, angled away from me. I was overhanging all the way to the bottom. I stared down, trying to judge the height of the wall. I thought I could see the snow-covered base of the wall with the dark outline of a crevice directly beneath me. Then snow flurries blocked my view. I looked back at the edge above. There was no chance of Simon hauling me up. It would have been extremely hard with a solid belay. Sitting in the snow seat, it would be suicidal to attempt it. I shouted at the darkness above and heard an unintelligible muffled yell. I couldn't be sure whether it had been Simon or an echo of my own shout. I waited silently, hugging the rope with my arms to stay upright and feeling shocked as I stared between my legs at the drop. Gradually, and with a sense of mounting dread, I began to get some perspective into what I was looking at. I was an awfully long way above the crevice at the base of the cliff, and as it slowly dawned on me, I felt my stomach lurch with fear. There was at least 100 feet of air below my feet. I kept staring at the drop, hoping to find I was mistaken. I realized that, far from being wrong, I had been conservative in my estimate. For a moment, I did nothing while my thoughts whirled, and I tried to assess how things had changed. Then one fact jolted through my thoughts. I swung round and stared at the wall. It was 6 feet from me. At full arm's reach, I still couldn't reach the ice with my axe. I tried swinging towards the wall, but ended up spinning helplessly. I knew that I had to get back up the rope, and I had to do it quickly. Simon had no idea what I'd gone over. The other steep drops were short walls. He had no reason to assume this would be any different. In that case, he might lower me. Oh, Jesus, I'll jam on the halfway knot long before I get to the bottom. It was impossible to reach the wall, and I realized quickly that it wouldn't help me. I couldn't climb 15 feet of overhanging ice with one leg. I fumbled at my waist for the 2 loops of rope I had tied there. I found them but couldn't grip them with my mitts on. I wrenched off the mitts with my teeth and reached for the 2 loops again. I slipped one over my wrist and held the second in my teeth. In reaching for the loops, I had to let go of the rope and tumbled backwards so that I hung from the waist. My rucksack had pulled me over, and I hung in an inverted curve with my head and legs lower than my waist. I struggled to swing up until I reached the rope and pulled myself back to a sitting position. All right. We are going to stay on page 97 with Joe hanging out in the air. I'm kind of afraid that Simon might die or something, trying to get him off the mountain. Because obviously Joe survives, I suppose. I don't know. We'll find out. I still don't have a catchy sign-off phrase, so if you think of something, put it in the comments below. Hope you subscribe, and see you next time. Bye, bookworms.